Have you ever stopped to wonder how a simple chocolate bar begins its life? Not in a factory. Not on a supermarket shelf. But hanging from the trunk of a tree, deep within the humid rainforests of the tropics. Every year, the world consumes millions of tons of chocolate. It is given as a gift on Valentine's Day, hidden inside children's Easter baskets, enjoyed during celebrations, and quietly eaten as a late-night snack. For many of us, chocolate is simply a delicious treat, something so common that we rarely stop to think about where it comes from. Yet behind every bite lies a journey that spans continents, depends on millions of farmers, and involves one of the most fascinating agricultural processes on Earth. Long before chocolate becomes silky smooth, wrapped in colorful packaging, or displayed in elegant boutiques, it begins as a brightly colored fruit, growing directly from the trunk of an extraordinary tree. A fruit that, surprisingly, looks nothing like chocolate at all. Inside that fruit are seeds. Seeds that are bitter, almost inedible, and completely lacking the rich aroma we associate with chocolate. So, how do those bitter seeds become one of the world's most beloved foods? The answer is a remarkable story of nature, science, craftsmanship, and patience, a process that has been refined over thousands of years, yet still relies on many of the same traditional techniques practiced by ancient civilizations. From the dense tropical forests, where cocoa trees thrive, to the careful hands of farmers, who harvest each pod, to the complex fermentation that creates chocolate's unmistakable flavor, and finally to the enormous factories, capable of producing millions of chocolate bars every single day. Every stage plays a vital role. Miss just one step, and the chocolate we know today simply wouldn't exist. This is the incredible journey of cocoa. Our story begins thousands of years ago, long before chocolate became one of the world's most profitable food industries. The origins of cocoa can be traced back to the tropical rainforests of Central and South America, where the cacao tree, scientifically known as Theobroma cacao, first evolved. Its scientific name translates to food of the gods, a fitting title for a tree that would one day transform economies, inspire cultures, and captivate billions of people around the globe. Archaeological discoveries suggest that humans began using cacao more than 3,500 years ago. The Olmec civilization, regarded as one of the earliest major civilizations in Mesoamerica, is believed to have been among the first to cultivate and consume cacao. Although little is known about exactly how they prepared it, evidence indicates that cacao already held significant cultural importance. Centuries later, the Maya elevated cacao to an entirely different level. To the Maya, cocoa was far more than food. It played an essential role in religious ceremonies, royal feasts, weddings, and important political gatherings. Wealthy families often drank a bitter beverage made by grinding roasted cocoa beans into a paste before mixing it with water, spices, herbs, and sometimes chili peppers. The drink was repeatedly poured from one vessel to another, creating a thick layer of foam on the surface, a feature considered the most desirable part of the drink. Unlike today's sweet hot chocolate, this ancient beverage was intensely bitter, rich, and aromatic. The Aztecs, who later dominated much of central Mexico, admired cacao just as deeply. According to their traditions, the feathered serpent god Quetzalcoatl had gifted the cacao tree to humanity, making it a sacred plant worthy of immense respect. Cocoa beans soon became one of the world's earliest forms of money. Historical accounts describe bustling marketplaces where everyday goods could be purchased using cocoa beans as currency. A handful of beans might buy fresh fruit or vegetables, while larger quantities could purchase clothing, livestock, or valuable tools. Even taxes were sometimes paid in cocoa. Its value extended far beyond economics. For the Aztecs, chocolate was a drink reserved primarily for nobles, priests, distinguished warriors, and rulers. The famous Emperor Montezuma II was said to consume several cups every day, before attending important meetings or leading military campaigns. Rich, bitter, and often infused with spices, cacao was believed to provide strength, endurance, and wisdom. Everything changed in the early 16th century. When Spanish explorers arrived in the Americas, they encountered cacao for the first time. At first, many Europeans found the bitter beverage unpleasant. It lacked the sweetness they were accustomed to, and had a bold, earthy flavor unlike anything they had ever tasted. But it didn't take long for experimentation to change everything. By adding cane sugar, cinnamon, vanilla, and occasionally milk, Spanish chocolatiers transformed the ancient drink into an entirely new experience. What had once been a sacred ceremonial beverage, gradually became a luxurious indulgence enjoyed by Europe's aristocracy. The popularity of chocolate spread rapidly. From Spain, it reached the royal courts of France, Italy, England, and beyond. Elegant chocolate houses began appearing in major European cities, where wealthy patrons gathered to socialize over steaming cups of the fashionable new drink. As demand continued to rise, Europe faced a major challenge. Cacao could only be grown in tropical climates. To satisfy the growing appetite for chocolate, European powers established cocoa plantations throughout their overseas colonies, introducing the crop to regions in Africa and Asia, whose warm, humid climates closely resembled its native. Over time, these new growing regions began producing enormous quantities of cocoa, transforming the crop from a rare luxury into a global commodity consumed by millions of people every single day. But, while chocolate became more accessible to the world, the process of creating it remained incredibly demanding. A cocoa tree does not simply produce chocolate. It produces a fruit that must be carefully cultivated, harvested, fermented, dried, transported, roasted, and transformed through a series of complex steps, before it becomes the familiar chocolate we know. And the journey begins with the farmers, who dedicate years of work to a single tree. Cocoa farming is a test of patience. A newly planted cacao tree may spend several years growing, before it produces its first harvest. During that time, farmers must protect the young trees from harsh weather, competing vegetation, and diseases that can spread quickly through plantations. Every decision matters. A poorly maintained farm can lose an entire season's production. A fungal infection can destroy thousands of pods. A changing climate can affect flowering, rainfall patterns, and the survival of the delicate trees. For many farming families, cocoa is not just a crop. It is their livelihood. It pays for food, education, healthcare, and the daily needs of millions of people around the world. Yet, despite the importance of cocoa, many farmers face difficult challenges. The global chocolate industry generates enormous profits, but the people who grow the raw material often receive only a small portion of the final value. This contrast has become one of the biggest conversations surrounding the future of chocolate. But, before the beans ever reach international markets, they must first survive one of the most fascinating stages of the entire process, the transformation of a simple cocoa pod into the foundation of chocolate itself. And that transformation begins deep inside the plantation, where farmers carefully harvest the fruit by hand. Unlike many fruits that can simply be picked when they fall from a tree, cocoa pods require careful judgment. Farmers must know exactly when a pod has reached maturity, because harvesting too early or too late can affect the quality of the beans inside. The ripe pods hang directly from the trunk and thick branches of the cacao tree, displaying a variety of colors depending on their variety. Some turn bright yellow, others orange, red, or deep purple. But appearance alone is not always enough to determine readiness. Experienced farmers examine the pods carefully, checking their size, color, and sound. A gentle tap can reveal whether the beans inside have developed properly. Once a pod is ready, it is removed using a sharp harvesting tool attached to a long handle. Farmers must be extremely careful not to damage the flower cushions on the tree, because those same areas will produce future flowers and future harvests. Each pod is opened by hand, usually with a small knife or wooden tool. Inside is a surprising sight, rows of cocoa beans covered in a thick layer of sweet, white pulp. At this stage, the beans still have none of the familiar characteristics of chocolate. They are bitter, acidic, and almost unrecognizable compared to the finished product found in stores. The real magic begins after harvesting. The freshly removed cocoa beans are placed into wooden boxes, baskets, or piles covered with banana leaves, beginning a process that has been used for centuries. Fermentation. This is one of the most important stages in cocoa production. Without fermentation, chocolate would not have its deep aroma, complex flavor, or rich brown color. During this process, naturally occurring yeasts and bacteria begin breaking down the sweet pulp surrounding the beans. As microorganisms consume the sugars within the pulp, they produce heat, alcohol, and acids that gradually penetrate the cocoa beans, triggering a series of complex chemical reactions. This is the moment when cocoa begins its incredible transformation. The bitter, flavorless seeds inside the fresh pod slowly develop the deep aromas and rich characteristics that will eventually define chocolate. Compounds responsible for harsh bitterness begin to break down, while new flavor molecules are created through the interaction of heat, microbes, and time. The fermentation process is carefully controlled, because even a small mistake can affect the final quality of the chocolate. If the beans are underfermented, they may produce chocolate with a sharp, unpleasant bitterness, and a weak aroma. If they are overfermented, unwanted flavors can develop, reducing the quality of the finished product. For this reason, experienced cocoa farmers rely on generations of knowledge to determine the perfect moment when fermentation is complete. During fermentation, farmers regularly turn the cocoa beans using wooden tools. This allows oxygen to reach every layer of the pile, ensuring that all the beans undergo the same transformation. Slowly, the once pale seeds begin changing color. Their interior becomes darker, their texture changes, and the complex foundation of chocolate flavor begins forming. After several days, the fermentation stage comes to an end. But the beans are still far from ready. At this point, they contain too much moisture to be stored safely. If left untreated, mold and harmful microorganisms could quickly destroy the harvest. The next challenge is removing that excess moisture. Drying. Traditionally, cocoa beans are spread across large wooden platforms or mats under the tropical sun. Farmers carefully arrange them into thin layers and turn them several times each day, ensuring that every bean dries evenly and that moisture escapes gradually. During this period, the beans continue to change. The sunlight does more than simply remove water. It allows the chemical reactions that began during fermentation to continue, helping to stabilize the flavors and aromas that will later define the chocolate. Farmers carefully monitor the beans throughout the drying process. They inspect them for signs of mold, remove damaged beans, and protect the harvest from unexpected rainfall, which can quickly ruin days of careful work. In many cocoa-growing regions, farmers must constantly watch the sky. A sudden tropical downpour can force them to quickly cover the beans and protect them from absorbing moisture again. For small-scale farmers who depend on every harvest, losing a batch of cocoa can have devastating consequences. After several days of drying, the beans lose much of their original moisture and become harder, darker, and more durable. The rich brown color that consumers associate with cocoa begins to appear. Once the beans reach the correct moisture level, they are carefully collected, sorted, and prepared for transportation. But before they can become chocolate, they must pass through another important stage, quality evaluation. Buyers and cocoa experts examine the beans to determine their size, color, aroma, and overall condition. Samples are often cut open to inspect the inside, revealing whether fermentation was successful and whether the beans developed properly. High-quality cocoa is prized for its complex flavors, which can include hints of fruit, nuts, flowers, caramel, or spices depending on where it was grown and how it was processed. This connection between location and flavor is similar to what happens with fine wines or specialty coffee. Just as grapes absorb the characteristics of the soil, climate, and environment where they are grown, cocoa beans carry the unique identity of the place they come from. This idea is often referred to as terroir, the influence of a region's natural conditions on the final taste of an agricultural product. For cocoa, terroir is shaped by many factors. The minerals in the soil, the amount of rainfall, the temperature, the surrounding plants, and even the traditional methods used by farmers all contribute to the final flavor profile of the beans. A cocoa variety grown near the volcanic soils of Ecuador may develop bright fruity and floral notes, while beans from West Africa may produce deeper chocolate flavors with earthy and nutty characteristics. Even within the same country, cocoa from different regions can taste noticeably different. This is why chocolate makers often search for specific cocoa origins when creating premium chocolate products. They are not simply buying a raw ingredient, they are selecting a unique combination of flavors created by nature and shaped by human hands. But before those flavors can be experienced, the cocoa beans must undergo one of the most dramatic transformations in their entire journey. They must be roasted. When the dried cocoa beans arrive at processing facilities, they are first carefully cleaned to remove any remaining debris, pieces of shell, stones, or other unwanted materials collected during harvesting and transportation. The cleaned beans are then placed into enormous roasting machines. This stage is where the hidden potential inside the cocoa bean begins to awaken. Much like roasting coffee beans, roasting cocoa creates powerful chemical reactions that develop the rich aromas and flavors people associate with chocolate. As the beans are exposed to carefully controlled heat, hundreds of new flavor compounds begin forming, through a complex series of chemical reactions. This is the moment, when the hidden personality of the cocoa bean is revealed. Before roasting, fermented cocoa beans contain many harsh and unpleasant characteristics. They may have sharp acidic notes, strong bitterness, and a raw flavor that bears little resemblance to chocolate. But under the careful application of heat, those rough edges begin to disappear. The natural sugars and proteins inside the beans react together, creating new compounds responsible for the familiar aromas of roasted cocoa, caramel, nuts, and warm spices. This transformation is one of the reasons roasting is considered both a science and an art. Chocolate manufacturers carefully adjust roasting temperatures and timing, depending on the type of cocoa they are working with. A bean grown in one region may require a completely different roasting approach, from a bean grown thousands of kilometers away. A few extra minutes in the roasting machine can completely change the final taste. Roasting is where the character of the chocolate begins to emerge. Some chocolate makers prefer a lighter roast, that preserves the delicate fruity and floral notes of premium cocoa. Others use a stronger roast, to create deeper, richer flavors with hints of coffee, caramel, and toasted nuts. But achieving the perfect balance requires precision. Too little heat, and the cocoa may remain unpleasantly acidic. Too much heat, and the delicate flavors created during fermentation can be destroyed, leaving behind a burnt or bitter taste. Once roasting is complete, the beans are cooled quickly, to prevent further cooking. But the next challenge is removing the outer shell. Every cocoa bean is protected by a thin layer known as the shell or husk. Although this shell played an important role in protecting the seed during growth, it has little value in creating chocolate. When properly tempered, chocolate melts smoothly on the tongue, because the cocoa butter crystals are arranged in the ideal structure. This carefully controlled balance is what gives high-quality chocolate its luxurious texture and unforgettable experience. It creates the clean break when a chocolate bar is snapped, the glossy shine on its surface, and the slow, creamy melt that releases its complex flavors. Only after tempering is complete can the chocolate move to the final stages of production. The liquid chocolate is poured into specially designed molds that determine its final shape. These molds can create everything from simple chocolate bars to delicate truffles, filled candies, and intricate seasonal designs. Inside modern chocolate factories, this process happens at incredible speed. Machines can produce thousands of pieces every hour, each one measured, shaped, and cooled with remarkable precision. But even in these highly advanced facilities, attention to detail remains essential. Small imperfections can affect the appearance, texture, or taste of the final product. Quality control teams inspect the chocolate carefully, checking for issues such as uneven surfaces, incorrect weight, or poor tempering. Once approved, the chocolate pieces are wrapped in protective packaging, designed to preserve freshness and prevent damage from heat and humidity. Then begins the final journey. Trucks transport the finished products to warehouses, supermarkets, specialty stores, and homes across the world. A chocolate bar that started as a fruit growing on a tropical tree has now traveled through farms, fermentation rooms, drying platforms, factories, and distribution networks spanning thousands of kilometers. But the story of chocolate is much larger than the product itself. Behind every piece of chocolate are millions of people, whose work often remains invisible. There are the farmers who wake before sunrise to care for their cocoa trees. There are the harvesters who carefully remove each pod by hand, often working under the heat of the tropical sun to collect the fruits that will eventually become one of the world's most beloved foods. There are the workers who break open thousands of cocoa pods, separate the beans, and carefully monitor the fermentation and drying process that determines the quality of the final product. There are the traders, transporters, factory workers, engineers, and chocolatiers, who each play a role in moving cocoa from remote farms to global markets. Every stage depends on the one before it. A mistake during harvesting can affect fermentation. Poor fermentation can reduce the quality of the beans. Improper roasting can destroy valuable flavors. And careless processing can prevent the chocolate from reaching its full potential. The creation of chocolate is a delicate chain, where nature, science, and human effort must work together perfectly. Yet behind this incredible industry lies a challenge that threatens its future. Climate change is becoming one of the greatest dangers facing cocoa production. Cocoa trees are extremely sensitive plants. They require specific temperatures, reliable rainfall, and stable environmental conditions to survive. Even small changes in climate can disrupt flowering, reduce yields, and increase the spread of diseases. In many cocoa-growing regions, farmers are already experiencing longer dry seasons, unpredictable rainfall, and rising temperatures. For a crop that depends on a very specific environment, these changes can have devastating effects. Some farmers are responding by planting more shade trees, improving soil health, using more resilient cocoa varieties, and adopting farming methods that protect the surrounding ecosystem. These efforts are not only about saving a crop. They are about protecting the millions of families whose lives depend on cocoa. And behind every bite of chocolate is a world waiting to be discovered. A world of farmers, forests, traditions, science, and centuries of innovation. A world where a fragile tree growing in a tropical rainforest can create a product enjoyed by billions of people across the planet. The journey of cocoa reminds us that the things we often take for granted can have extraordinary stories hidden beneath the surface. A simple chocolate bar is not simply a sweet snack. It is the final chapter of a journey that begins with a flower, continues with a fruit, and passes through countless hands before reaching us. It is a story of transformation. A story of nature's generosity and human determination. And as long as cocoa trees continue to grow, and people continue to protect the traditions behind them, the incredible journey of cocoa will continue for generations to come.